Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Raging Loop. In fact, I think we're getting kind of close to where we need to stop. But we did experience the first full ending, which obviously we didn't quite make it. This is the second time we've died, potentially the third time if we'd had made some different choices. But yeah, let's see what happens. Okay, so we got key number 4. Suddenly, a rush of memories flitted into my mind. Let's remember. Right, how did I forget? I'd already experienced this looping phenomenon or whatever. Hold on, looping? What the hell? There was no way something like that could... But... if that wasn't it, what else could explain this? How else could I, someone who'd died once, be alive right now? I had clear memories of getting caught up in some strange incident at Yasumizu and... shit, I can't remember how it ended. It was like this last time, too. My memories are all fragmented. But I did remember that I went to Yasumizu, met the people there, and died. Had I come back here when... or because I died? That was a ridiculous idea, but the pain and fear I felt back then was just so vivid and fresh in my mind that I couldn't simply dismiss it as a dream or illusion. There was no point in lying to myself. I was here having experienced something that made me sure I died. It was an incomplete memory from the future. I had no idea why I had it, but I definitely did. I had to come to terms with it first and foremost. The gas tank wasn't empty, but my cell phone couldn't find a signal and was running out of battery, and my throat was a bit dry, exactly like last time. That meant I was about to arrive at... I knew it. I really didn't want to meet that employee again, but from what I'd experienced, she was the only one I'd meet before going to Fujiyoshi. So avoiding her probably wasn't the greatest idea. Her attitude was shit, but at least she always did what I asked. Though I really didn't want to drive down that unpaved road again. Once again, she greeted her customers in a borderline insane way. It actually made me kind of relieved, and I wanted to believe that it was just some kind of trick of the mind. It's just like before. To her, I was just I was an annoying late-night customer. Oh well, I'd just buy what I wanted.
くださいな。
あ？どんだけ買う気なんだよ。
No reason. Yasumizu was just desperately poor, and it had me worried. What was her problem? I was the customer. With this much stuff, she had to use the register. Still grumbling, she started scanning the barcodes. When she was done, I paid and asked.
近場の人里を目指したいんですけど、地図を見せてもらえませんか？
あ？地図なんざねえよ。
そこをなんとか。
待ってろ。
She went through the staff door.
あったわ。
I knew it.
これがこの店。で、十字路を北へ行け。
ふむふむ。
しばらくしたら立教があっから渡れ。最初の分岐のとこに大岩があっからそこを右折してあとは直線。
地図には森しか見えませんが。
I knew that it was. There wasn't even a paved road there. Why'd she recommend the road anyway? If I'd crashed and died, it'd be homicide by negligence.
書かれてねえだけで集落があんだよ。
That wasn't a lie. It wasn't weird for Yasumizu to not be on the map. It was a nearly abandoned settlement in the middle of nowhere. Why did she know about it? Did she live in Kamafujiyoshi or something?
ちょっとバイクじゃきつそうですね。そっちの藤吉村には？
くっそ面倒な峠道で2時間かかんぞ。
一応メモっといていいですか？
好きにしろよ。
隣の町は
山2つ向こ
う。Man, I couldn't make any sense of the local distance measurements.
ここいらを深夜に無茶すんのは進めねえぜ。
Oh, actual consideration. Though it was hard to be grateful, she was the one who pointed me in the direction of that shitty road in the first place.
引き返すのも勇気ってやつじゃねえの？
Turning back, huh?
まあ考えますよ。どうも。
毎度。
あ、そうだ。この辺でローカルな飲み物とかってないです？陳列棚には特にはなさそうでしたけど。
いや、そこにねえもんはねえって。
もしかしたらバックヤードにあるかもしれないなと思って。
あるわけねえだろ。
まあまあ一応見るだけでも。
待ってろ。あったわ。
Seriously? She brought me a 500cc bottle with a black liquid inside. The label looked written by hand and said Wild Plant Cola. I expected nothing and got something huge. This place was amazing.
あ、すみません。荷物だいぶ多くなっちゃったんで、荷台にくくるゴムロープみたいなのないですか？
てめえ、ここはコンビニだぞ。
見てくれるだけでいいんで。
待ってろ。あったわ。
Seriously?
せっかくなんで、このメモにあるその他ちょっとしたものたちを一通り見てきてもらえないですか？
いい加減にしろよ、てめえ殺すぞ。
ついに殺すって言った？一応で構いませんから。
待ってろ。
あざーす。
全部あったわ。
なんなんだこのコンビニ。
It felt like she was about to kill me, but I successfully came out with pretty much all I needed. Then I just made a run for it. I opened up the weird wild plant cola. Looking up at the noisy light trap above, I took a sip. It was cool, intense, and had a strange grassy flavor, but it wasn't too bad at all. I expected something totally gross, but it was actually a legit drink. Slightly disappointed, I looked at the ingredients. Cola and plant extract. Hold on, cola as an ingredient? Did they just buy cola and mix it in? And plant extract could be anything from fruits to poisonous plants. What the hell? Was this even safe to drink? Well, at least it tasted good. It was probably smart to just turn around and drive away. Entering Fujiyoshi means death. Turn back. Perhaps that was what the loops were trying to tell me. Maybe I ought to listen? But was it really that easy? I had no real grounds for this, but if the cause of this strange phenomenon was somewhere in the village, perhaps I couldn't break out of the loop until I'd solved the mystery behind it. What would happen if I left then? Would I go on and live out the rest of my days only to die and come back here? Would I return to youth after years of being old? That part didn't sound half bad, actually, but was it really something I could just accept so easily? This part was just speculation. But what if I actually hadn't moved an inch from that mountain pass? Was everything from then, now, and until death just an antemortem, fever, dream, and dying again would just bring me back there? If that was how it was, everything I'd do with my life from this point onward would be meaningless. Maybe I really should move on, only after taking care of whatever was binding me. Also, how could I leave something so strange, unnatural, and incomprehensible and just return to the city? I think... I mean, we can do all these. Well, let's do it. Until I'd finished my drink, the thing guiding me was my good sense, otherwise known as opportunism. Man, what a weird experience that was. I'd make a good campfire story once I made it back where I belonged. I pushed aside my sense that something wasn't right, my anxiety and my fear, and straddled the seat of my bike. Well, there was another way to look at this. I could try and see whatever ignoring it all and running away would actually work. After all, this might end up being the only way to solve the problem. I turned the key, opened the throttle, pushed the signal to the left, and connected the clutch. Away I went, starting with a left turn. Anyway, I'd go back up the mountain path. I'd had enough of this ride. I'd return to civilization, eat some normal food, get some decent sleep, and live my boring everyday life. Just recognizing how precious these things were was more than enough for me. That made this trip worth it all. A dense mist drifted into view. No, I don't need to watch the hidden corner for this. Let's go back. Well, turning around, I guess, isn't going to solve our problem. Okay, so let's pass by Fujiyoshi. As I finished my drink, the idea I had was barely different from just turning around and leaving. Maybe I could just pass it by? I was curious what would happen if I ignored Yasumizu, Fujiyoshi, and the clerk's warning and simply drove on past. Wait, why would anything happen? I'd just continue down the road, right? Why do I feel so uneasy then? After thinking for a moment, I'd arrived at a mindset of eliminating whatever options seemed wrong. My guess was that this wouldn't take care of the root of the problem. But I was the type who didn't believe that until I tried it myself. I turned the key, opened the throttle, and pushed the signal to the left and connected the clutch. Away I went, starting with a right turn. The tense mountain path continued for a while. Though I didn't feel like falling asleep, I was definitely becoming more and more exhausted, both mentally and physically. Even in this jacket, the force of the wind going by was doing a number on my body, especially as it kept onward for over an hour. I did, however, see a sign above my head that said Fujiyoshi. As I decided, I'd just pass by it, never coming close to Kamafujiyoshi or Yasumizu. Now I just passed the two mountains and reached the town I was told about. Perhaps I should have been more suspicious of the fact that I'd stopped acting on my heart after that. Maybe I was just so tired I couldn't even make such decisions. I can only remember noticing a strange dense mist surrounding me, but that was when my brain lost all capacity for perception or judgment. Bad ending number 7. Oh, should I hit a corner? Nah, we're good with the hit. We don't need a hidden corner in this one. Okay, so let's choose the route that doesn't kill us right away. Let's enter Fujiyoshi through the normal route. As I finished my drink, I made my decision. I'd return there. I'd face that tragedy again. Of course, I was curious about this looping phenomena, but I did recall what I thought during my final moments. It was something like, if only I'd handled this better. And for better or worse, this weird looping phenomenon had given me a chance to do just that. If I went about it a bit better, perhaps I could get a better ending. Hisako Mamiya and Yudai Hishimoto, Kanza Makishima, Yosuke Oribe, Takami Muro, the old man who cried wolf, Chikimochi Kamoshida, Rikaku Imatsu, Kiori Oribe, Kinosuke Nasato, Meiko. Hell, even Yasunuga Oribe, Tai Yamawaki, and Haru Makamishima were just victims of some strange superstition. But I, Hariaki Fusashi, could not delude myself. I was no hero. I had no powers, no convictions. I was just a dilettante. My only motivation here was a sense of perfectionism. I was annoyed at how many mistakes I'd made the first time around. Plus, there was a certain attraction I felt towards the unknown. It was an urge foundational to my being, and I'd be risking my life on its behalf. I wasn't about to pretend I was acting for the sake of others here, although Chiemi Serizawa, though she hated her childhood home, it remained part of who she was, and I wanted to keep that from being tarnished with blood. That motive was perverse, forceful, selfish, lustful, and filthy, and I couldn't let myself forget any of that. I remembered the names of those I'd met, and what I had to do. I turned the key, opened the throttle, pushed the signal to the left, and connected the clutch. Away I went, starting with a right turn.
しばらくしたら陸橋があっから渡れ。最初の分岐のとこに大岩があっからそこを右折してあとは直線。
I quickly came across it. I could barely remember this overpass. The large boulder wasn't new to me either, but I wouldn't take that route this time. I just kept on driving, not lowering my speed for a moment. Full speed ahead. I drove on the winding mountain path. Strangely enough, my fatigue, though present, wasn't too bad, and my head was perfectly clear. I knew which route to take without even looking at my copy of the map. Or maybe I'd driven through here before? Perhaps this wasn't the first choice I'd made, but one of many? I couldn't be sure, and since my memories were so incomplete, nothing was certain. Still, there'd be an asset in the fight ahead. I wasn't going into this unarmed. I could no longer see the moon. If those memories held true, the rain would begin soon.
ここまでよ。
Huh?
あれだ。大将、前に動画配信可能範囲のお知らせ機能をオンにしただろ。今のはそれだ。つまり、動画配信が可能なのはこのチャプターまでだ。正確にはこの後、選択肢が出るまでは大丈夫だから、ぼちぼち挨拶やら何やらの準備をしといてくれ。
I drove in darkness, but I could still make out a sign above me. The road wasn't wide, but I decelerated and somehow managed a U-turn. There were no other cars, so no one would complain. I returned and looked at the sign. It said that driving ahead would have led me to Kachihara, while turning right, I'd find myself in Fujiyoshi.
ようやくか。
It was already past midnight, but actually earlier than I thought. A 30-minute drive from this point would lead me to Fujiyoshi, or rather Kamafujiyoshi, a place that wasn't too popular among Yasumizu people.
お、家だ。
My time estimate was more or less right. After 30 or so minutes, I began seeing houses between the hills and the trees. I eventually left the forest and could see as well as anyone could in the middle of the night. It was already raining, and I knew it'd only get worse. I had to do something before that happened. There were next to no city lights, and not a single house I could see was lit up either. However, unlike Yasumizu, the destitute place where most of the houses had been built from wood, the houses here were more modern. The road was well paved too. I could even see some bus stops and vending machines, emphasizing that this was modern Japan.
宿があるとしても、この時間に突然素泊まりができるとは思えないな。
Some would think there was a way for me to at least get a roof over my head, but I knew that was just a city dweller misconception. Same went for the idea that rural folk were nice enough to let you stay if you just asked nicely. That was just pure delusion. In actuality, rural areas were subject to local legends and traditions, with many of the residents believing good, peaceful lives were only possible thanks to their protection. Of course, that wasn't always wrong, but that was also the reason why many rural people were so cold to outsiders. Hell, this was a village so behind the times it had a settlement for the ostracized, which they discriminated against so badly. This place was probably even more insular than your average rural village. They wouldn't take kindly to an outsider like me and would probably be wary of the entire time I stayed here. I can only imagine how strongly they'd react if some brown-haired man suddenly drove in on a bike and... Was I some sort of idiot? Like the city boy I was, I just went in thinking it'd all just work out. And now I'd caught the attention of a police officer. When I doubted he'd arrest me or anything, I doubted he'd arrest me or anything, but the fact that there was some weirdo who invaded the village in the middle of the night would spread among the people here in less than a day. Now I'd be treated like a criminal if I wanted to talk to anyone here. The officer looked middle-aged, but what stood out about him was the fact that he seemed like the most generic meat-headed old man from the countryside. He told me to sit down here and wait until he came back. I can only imagine the chewing out I was in for. Still, I was pretty sure that passing Kamafujiyoshi was one of the main conditions here. I could remember clearly. I had memories of this. Hisako Mamiya and Yudai Hashimoto came here through the normal route, and they weren't considered a problem. They died on the first day of the feast, but that wasn't because they were outsiders. They just violated the feast's rules. They either hadn't cleansed themselves, sheltered all alone, or dreamed. My assumption was that before it all happened, they stayed at an inn in Kamafujiyoshi. They'd only come to Yasumizu on that day for the sake of an article. Unfortunately for them, the mist came and the landslide happened, making it impossible for them to go back to Kamafujiyoshi by car. Then everyone started sheltering and no one came to help them. Yeah, even Takumi-san had tried to cut me off because I was an outsider. Giving me a way to survive, however, impoverished, was probably a huge risk for a Chiemi. I had to keep that in mind. Back to the journalists, though. They'd ended up abandoned in the village plaza, clueless about what was happening. What had they done then? They'd obviously chosen to spend the night in the van. I had no idea how Hashimoto-shi and Mamiya-san fit in there together, but since they hadn't slept alone, they'd broke the shelter rule. Hell, I wasn't sure if the van was a valid source of shelter to begin with, even if locked. That was probably why Hashimoto-shi's body was found in the van. And since Hisako Mamiya had probably roamed around at night, she'd broken the dream rule. I had no idea why she'd gone outside, but it could have been something simple, such as nature calling or search for a better place to sleep. Of course, as a journalist, she might have smelled a scoop in this ominous village and gone out to gather info. Not to mention they couldn't have taken a bath in their situation, so they obviously hadn't cleansed themselves. And so she died at the hands of that thing. Now, about what happened to me. I died once after leaving the outdoor toilet. Dying because I'd gone outside was understandable, but honestly I wasn't sure if that toilet even counted as inside. I bet that it didn't. And of course I hadn't bathed or slept, so I broke all the rules. And yet I survived. What made my situation different then? It was whether I'd been found by that thing or not. Upon seeing me, it recognized me as a rule breaker and executed me. But when it hadn't found me, I survived despite breaking all the rules. That meant that the sheltering law was simply a method meant to keep the werewolf-like thing from finding you. The time I survived, I tried to force its way in, but failed. Nothing happened to me because I was locked in, but if the lock was broken or something, I'd have been found and easily killed. Basically, you could avoid the monster by just properly locking yourself in somewhere. Miko was proof of that. She was a lost child who'd come from the hated Sadanaga, but she'd survived all the way up to the end without succumbing to the corruption. That meant the important thing there was to get a lockable residence in Yasumizu with a bath. And that was exactly why arriving via the normal route was necessary. If I'd come from Sadanaga again, most of the inhabitants would treat me with distrust and discuss driving me away. But if I was a person who'd arrived through Kamafujiyoshi, or for whatever reason, they'd be willing to accommodate. Meiko was probably only given a place because she was young and because Dekako Uemetsu had protected her. I couldn't expect similar treatment. Dekako Uemetsu preemptively gave a house to Meiko? To a small child like her? That made it seem like she knew the mists and the feast would come. I'd think more on that later, though. It could be that she'd given her a key right after the mist came. Anyway, if I could be like Meiko and get a proper place to stay in, I'd have the right to participate in the Feast of the Yomi Purge. I'd be able to listen to the talks myself instead of relying on Chiemi, and be able to contribute my own thoughts. I'd also learn much more about the feast. That meant a lot, considering that some people there, especially the elders, wouldn't want to talk about Yasumizu's problems to those outside the feast. Part of me wanted to avoid another tragedy, but the part of me that wanted to find out what was behind this mystery was equally strong. That monster, and the thing that allowed me to still be here, this looping phenomenon, were the main mysteries here. Though I did have some questions about the monster. It hadn't found me when I'd locked myself in the toilet. It was probably just curious why it was locked. Couldn't a monster with a wolf head just track me by scent? Why did it half-ass the job? Its failure to eliminate me only made the inhabitants more suspicious of me. There were no feast laws regarding outsiders. That was why it was best for us to just not be present. Looking at the current laws, those who didn't have a place to stay were outsiders, and they had to be removed because of that. This system worked fine for the most part, but then there was me, a proper breach. If that monster meted out the corruption, it was on the side of the great Lord Shinai. As such, it should have used some divine powers or whatever to address the problem. Also, it seemed to me like they'd had the power to unlock doors. Man, this is getting confusing. Last time, the wolves were Yasunaga Orabe and Tai Yamawaki. According to legend, they had been replaced by wolves who'd come back from the dead, but their story was completely different. They said they were the normal people who had wolves as their guardians. That meant that the thing couldn't have been Yasunaga-kun or Tai-san. It was more like an agent of the same side or whatever granted them their powers. I had no idea why they were granting the protection of the guardians, but from what I could tell, guardians were like fragments of a divine power. And if you were on the same side as the one who granted those powers, couldn't you just use the unlocking power whenever you wanted? Why would a supernatural being make such a careless mistake? Any assumptions made beyond this point would just be grasping at straws and bias my observations. I'd just stop here for now. Anyway, it was imperative I got myself a place to stay. What was I doing here anyway? I'd been theorizing about this and that for almost half an hour now. Dawn was close. I only had a little over 10 hours until the mist came, and I had to find a secure place to stay within that time. That was hard to begin with, but as things stood, it was outright impossible. Did I have to run away? What if I just ran away to Yasumizu and said I came from Kamafujiyoshi like it was no big deal and asked them to let me live there. Well, they had enough imagination to suspect me. I definitely needed someone from Kamafujiyoshi to vouch for me, and for that I had to find something that could turn this around. I looked around the police box. The tidy desk, a rotary phone. This felt like the place of an officer from the mid-20th century. There were wanted posters on the walls. Ah, they caught that guy. One of them even had the look of a criminal. And that one, a serial killer, eh? And it was possible he was lurking in the area, huh? That was pretty freaky. Finally, I heard some noise. The door opened, and the officer returned.
逃げねえでいい度胸じゃねえか。
逃げてよかったんですか？
ああ
Ah, he wasn't one to mess around.
いえ、別に僕に後ろ暗いところはありませんので。
名前は
房石春明です。工房の棒に岩石の石で房石。太陽のように明治の明で春明。
房石。変わっとる名前だな。まさか偽名じゃなかろうな。
Rude.
東京もんか。
ええ、まあ、そうですけど。
It was like anyone weird was from Tokyo to them. Some serious stereotyping there. He was right, though.
年は
24です。
ああ仕事は
学生ですよ。
大学か。頭が弱うても常識はないな。
I just drove on a road at night. That was so unfair. I wanted to talk back so badly.
で、なんで来た？
He lowered his voice a bit. That was the main matter here, and how he treated me would change depending on my answer. What angle did I have to take? So you got lost? So you followed after your girlfriend? Well, I got lost.
バイク旅行中に道に迷いまして。
I just told him the truth. There was nothing shady about that, and telling him some cheap lies would only make him suspicious.
本当か？
He put on a threatening tone. I really wish he didn't stare at me like that. What, did he expect me to fall for him?
本当ですよ。もう何時間も山の中を迷ってて、ようやく見つけたコンビニで、やっとここのことを知って。
コンビニ？勧めたか？ここに来いと。
She hadn't told me to go to Kamafujiyoshi, but she had told me about Yasumizu. I just tell the truth until the end.
なんか、山の中に地図にない集落があるとか言われて、そこはちょっとって言って、こっちを教えてもらったんです。
そりゃ奇妙な話だな。
あったんですかね、集落。
さあ、知らん。
That was clearly an act. He looked away. Man, this guy was honest.
まあ、わかった。本当に何でもないんだな。
ええ。
そうか。ま、こんな夜中に出歩いて疑われるようなことはもうせんようにな。
I'd have appreciated an apology for treating me with so much suspicion, but I had more important things to talk about.
なのですみませんが、一晩泊めていただけないかと。
よし、道を教えてやろう。
Huh?
いえ、もうヘトヘトでして。
そう言っとる間は大丈夫だ。
実はガソリンが。
俺の原付の分けてやろう。
ああ、気分が悪くなってきた。
そうか。早く行った方がいいな。
何かあるんですか？
何もない。
He wasn't even looking into my eyes as he said that. He'd gotten on his scooter and saw me off until the crossroads. Man, what a great guy. I didn't expect him to go this far. Yeah, right. Why the hell did he want me out so badly? Well, at least the rain stopped. That was the only good thing about this. Was this some special time of the year when the presence of outsiders was bad? Was it worth chasing me out, even if it seemed unnatural? That seemed like a decent guess. Even if the mist hadn't shown up for decades now, if the legends were deeply rooted in local culture, there would still be related traditions alive. Or maybe he was sure something bad was going to happen. Or was he on the side that'd make it happen? Did they have a means to create such a dense mist? The mist happened when the air cooled and the water vapor in the air couldn't stay gaseous. It was basically small water droplets. The mechanism by which they worked could easily be replicated in a lab. They even did that, and even did it on educational TV. Though I find it hard to believe they could reproduce a scale vast enough to hide an entire settlement. They'd need some device that no doubt be large and heavy, and it'd have to be in the Satanaga Rapids of all places. Though I'd only been to Satanaga when I couldn't see anything, either because it was at night or misty. If the mist was made by some huge machine put there by Kamafujiyoshi people, I'd be really pissed, to say the least. Though Takumi-san did say he'd had to pick up courses from Satanaga. Even if it was forbidden ground, it wasn't likely they could just install a device like that without anyone noticing. That was how it was in some novel, wasn't it? The corpse was there to begin with, but they just couldn't perceive it. I'd have liked to believe in something a tad more realistic. In the end, I had to keep going towards the area called Kachihara. Maybe I'd get to rest there? If I returned the next day, the cop would surely snap at me. Would I even go back? The fatigue was getting the better of me. I knew it was a good idea to stop, but no, I actually didn't know it. I wasn't able to think straight. Mist? Now? Was it artificial? No, that didn't make sense. My mind was hazy and I could no longer make sense of anything. Obtain key 5. Nice, officer. Bad ending number 8. Watch the hint corner? No, we don't need to watch the hint corner. But we did need to make that choice because if without that ending, we wouldn't get that key.
で、なんで来た?
I'll say I followed after my girlfriend. I had an idea.
実はその
なんだ? いえ、
心に決めた女性がこの辺りにいるって聞いて追ってきたんですよ。
There, he acted like he didn't care, but he was definitely interested. Here in human society, love stories were a supreme form of entertainment and a good excuse for doing all sorts of weird things. Anything was possible when a girl, or guy, was involved.
そりゃあ、そうは言うても、ここいらで東京行っとったもんがおったとは聞かんぞ。
いえ、会ったのは別の場所で。
ほう。
あれは僕が鳥インフルエンザの後遺症で軽井沢に静養に行った時。
And so I wove for him a dramatically majestic story of how I'd grown close to the woman I'd dedicated my life to. The cop was really into it. He looked like he didn't care at first, but by the time I got to the part where she first invited me to her house, he displayed a childlike enthusiasm. Eventually, we became true lovers, but she said she couldn't throw away her childhood home, which led her to a tearful goodbye. At that point, the cop was fully invested in the girl returning back home.
それで君は都会を捨ててこっち来る決意をしたと。はあ、はあ。
He smiled like he was about to pat me. I definitely captured his heart.
ああ、しかし、そんな若い娘おったか？ああ、なんつう子だ、君のフィアンセは。
There it was. Everyone in rural areas knew each other, so trying to make up a person wouldn't get me anywhere. But that wasn't a problem for me. I had the perfect name in mind.
芹沢千恵美って子です。
帰れ。
え？
帰れ。今すぐ出てけ。すぐ。
He stood up and approached me so menacingly I felt he was about to attack me. In the end, he jumped on his scooter and led me to some crossroads, clearly intent on getting me as far away from Fujiyoshi as possible. I was now headed towards the so-called Kachihara area. Kachihara. The rain had already stopped, but it was tiring me to drive along the still slick asphalt. I knew Tammy and Fujiyoshi were distant, to say the least, and since she'd been out of the village, they couldn't have known what she'd been up to. I thought that'd make my story more believable, but what the hell was that reaction? The thing that set him off was Tammy's name. She told me she'd almost killed someone with a bat. Was her reputation that bad? Even if it was that the right reaction to make? You'd expect something like, I really think you shouldn't, and the like. Was it because she was from Yasumizu? That makes sense. If they didn't want outsiders to know about Yasumizu, it makes sense for them to chase away anyone coming to meet her. But that only made me... But that would only make them look more suspicious. Anyway, what now? Maybe I try coming back again after some rest at the nearest town. Or from what I could tell, entering Yasumizu from Kamafujiyoshi wouldn't be as easy as I'd first thought. The fatigue was getting the better of me. I knew it was a good idea to stop, but no, I actually didn't know it. I wasn't able to think straight. Missed? Oh, okay. Well, this part is the same. A taboo name. Nah, we're fine. Okay, well now I have 2 keys, which will let me get to the next portion of the game.
で、なんで来た？
I'm just gonna snap.
なんでもいいじゃないですか。ここは日本だ。移動の自由がある。いつ何時どこにいようが僕の自由だろこら。
なんだ貴様おら。
いい加減こっちは死に飽きてんだ。戻ろうがなんだろうが死ぬのも結構辛いんだぞこら。
てめえこれタコこれ。
どうせこのルートもダメなんだろう。おい次はなんだ裸踊りでもしろってのか。いい趣味だな神様。
やれこれクソこれ。
つべこべ言わずに止めさせろ。そんで自然な感じで休みずに入らせろ。うわ
暴れ出した。なんだこいつ。もしもしもしもし。了解。射殺します。
Alright, well, we got another key, thankfully. Bad ending, number 10. Those are some of the best endings. Okay, so all of these get us the wrong answer. I think this one's a death too, but let's go through it. Where she went crazy, poison everyone. We did find a weapon, so let's tackle her. I don't know why I moved when I did. I was a man of words, not of impulse. In times of crisis, I was the type to turn tail and run after making some sort of parted threat. I shouldn't have been on good terms with either Kinyosuke or Kyoto-san to risk my life for them. Yet when I came to my senses, my body was dancing, charging straight for Kyoto-san with my right shoulder. And after a brief struggle, we collapsed. I heard her let out a strange cackle in my ears. I had to change my posture. Unless I pinned her knife hand down, But in the end, it turned out I really wasn't cut for the job. These roundabout thoughts were just delaying the inevitable. When the madly laughing woman embraced me, my thoughts ground to a complete halt. She stabbed me right in the back. Simple as that. To her, I was just another obstacle that had to be removed. I didn't know if the wound itself was fatal, but I could tell that the blade had sunk in incredibly deep, and that it was coated in leaf green poison. Yeah, it must have been a near instant death. My mind quickly grew hazy, yet my final moments were those of self-reflection. Reckless actions really aren't my forte at all. Oh, bad ending. Number 5. Alright, I don't think there are any other choices here. 5, 6, and 7.
ここまでよ。あれだ。大将、前に動画配信。今のはそれだ。正確にはこの後、選択肢が出るまでは大丈夫だから、ぼちぼち挨拶やら何やらの準備をしといてくれ。
Okay, well, with that being said, we'll honor the original publisher's wishes, and we'll stop the game from there. Yeah, so there is a lot that happens in this game. Many of which are things that you could never possibly guess, and some things that you could guess. But yes, yeah, you'll go through many more death loops in this game. So yeah, we're nowhere near as done. This is actually a pretty long visual novel, and again, I really love the interface. I love the characters. The voice acting's really good. The music, you know, it seems like background music when you're playing, but now that I've heard it a couple times, I actually kind of miss listening to it during my initial playthrough. But yeah, once again, this is a great visual novel. If you like a little bit of mystery, a tiny bit of horror, obviously not a lot, but more of a thriller mystery with some slight horror overtones, then definitely check it out. It's well worth your time, and I think you'll enjoy it as much as I do. And even after you get to the true end, which again takes quite a while, this game also includes some extras, which are events that happen after the story, and some which happen kind of in between the story, giving you a little bit more insight into the characters. Again, well worth it. Make sure you pick it up if you like visual novels. You will have a good time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.